A man sits alone in his car outside her apartment building, engine running, headlights cutting through midnight rain. He's been here for 27 minutes, rehearsing words that will never be spoken. You recognize this moment, don't you? The terrible arithmetic of desire, calculating courage against consequence, proximity against pride. The windshield fogs with his breathing, each exhale a small betrayal of the composure he believes he maintains. His phone screen illuminates. Her last message from 3 days ago, read 47 times, dissected like scripture by a desperate theologian. But step closer to the glass and watch as the world shifts. The car dissolves into gossamer wings, translucent and trembling. The man becomes a moth, drawn not to the harsh fluorescent light of her window, but to something far more insidious, the soft amber glow emanating from a jar that sits on her windowsill. Inside this jar, another version of himself beats frantically against the glass, wings torn and dusty, performing an eternal dance of approach and denial. The moth outside watches his cage double with a mixture of horror and longing. The imprisoned moth has what he wants: complete proximity to the light, uninterrupted access to the object of worship. But the glass walls that grant this closeness also ensure his destruction. His wings grow more tattered with each desperate flutter, his movements slower, more mechanical. He is dying of the very thing he sought to possess. As Schopenhauer whispered from his shadowed study, all satisfaction, or what is commonly called happiness, is really and essentially always negative only and never positive. The moth outside begins to understand the light was never the true object of desire. The desire itself was the prison, and her window merely provided the stage for his willing captivity. The jar suddenly shatters. The trapped moth, freed at last, doesn't fly toward the light. Instead, it crumbles to dust, having forgotten how to exist without the glass walls that once contained its suffering. The moth outside spreads his wings and flies not toward her window, but into the darkness where no light beckons, the first free movement he has made in years. The ancients called it eros, divine madness. Today, psychology names it limerence, the involuntary state of intense romantic attraction characterized by intrusive thinking, emotional dependency, and the fear of rejection. Coined by psychologist Dorothy Tenov in the 1970s, limerence manifests in our modern world as the compulsive checking of social media for signs of reciprocation. The elaborate mental scenarios we construct around casual interactions, the way we reorganize our entire emotional geography around someone who may barely register our existence. It appears in the professional who schedules meetings just to be near a colleague, the person who chooses their gym based on someone else's schedule, the endless analysis of text message response times as if they were ancient omens. Through Schopenhauer's limerence is the will to live at its most cunning. It convinces us that our suffering is actually a form of ecstasy, that our cage is actually a temple. The philosopher would recognize in this state a perfect example of what he called the pendulum swing between want and boredom. We suffer in the absence of our object, yet if we possess them completely, we would inevitably find ourselves empty, searching for the next source of beautiful torment. In myth, it was Tantalus reaching for fruit that withdrew at his touch. In you, it's the habit you can't see, the sweet poison of unrequited devotion. What does your jar look like? What gossamer wings have you forgotten you possess? And what false light keeps you beating against transparent walls, mistaking your prison for paradise? The truth whispered by broken glass. Sometimes the cruelest love is the love that almost happens, because it teaches us to mistake longing for living. The mask that wins desire always kills the face beneath it. She applies lipstick in the bathroom mirror, but the reflection looking back is not quite her own. It's a perfected version, eyes slightly larger, skin impossibly smooth, smile mysteriously knowing. She has been practicing this face for so long that she's forgotten which one is real. You know this ritual. The careful choreography of self-presentation, the strategic arrangement of features and expression before stepping into the world's harsh spotlight. The bathroom becomes a theater, the mirror both stage and audience, witnessing the daily transformation from self to performance. But follow her reflection deeper through the silvered glass and discover the mirror merchant's shop. A labyrinthine bazaar where reflections are bought, sold, and traded like precious commodities. Here, beneath streets that don't exist on any map, women arrive clutching their authentic faces like worn currency, desperate to exchange them for something more valuable. The merchant himself is a figure of impossible geometry, sometimes male, sometimes female, sometimes neither. His form shifting like quicksilver based on each customer's deepest wishes. His inventory stretches infinitely. Mirrors that reflect beauty, mirrors that reflect desirability, mirrors that show you as the object of someone else's obsession. Each surface promises the same thing. Become what you think they want, and you will finally be wanted. She approaches the counter, her real face naked and trembling in the harsh fluorescent light. "I want to be irresistible," she whispers, though the words taste like ash in her mouth. The merchant smiles, or perhaps grimaces. The expression is deliberately ambiguous, and presents her with a mirror framed in what appears to be silver but feels disturbingly warm to the touch. In this new reflection, she sees herself as the perfect synthesis of every male fantasy she has ever identified and cataloged. The mysterious woman who needs saving, the confident woman who doesn't need anyone, the innocent who is secretly experienced, the experienced who retains her innocence. She is every contradiction resolved, every male fear and desire made flesh. But as she watches, something terrible happens. The reflection begins to move independently, making choices she wouldn't make, smiling at people she doesn't find interesting, laughing at jokes she doesn't find funny. The more irresistible the reflection becomes, the more she realizes it has nothing to do with her at all. It is simply a sophisticated trap, baited with the promise of power, but designed to eliminate the very self that sought that power. As Schopenhauer observed, a person can be himself only so long as he is alone, and if he does not love solitude, he will not love freedom, for it is only when he is alone that he is really free. She understands now that the merchant was selling not beauty, but a beautiful form of slavery. She shatters the mirror. The reflection doesn't disappear. It steps out of the broken glass, fully formed and independent, and walks away to seduce the world with her stolen face. She is left with the shards, each one reflecting a fragment of who she was before she decided that wasn't enough. The ancients called it the siren's song. Today, psychology names it performative femininity, the unconscious adoption and exaggeration of culturally defined feminine traits and behaviors, often in response to the male gaze or patriarchal expectations, first systematically examined by Judith Butler and other feminist theorists. Performative femininity manifests in our modern world as the Instagram pose that requires 27 attempts, the strategic vulnerability deployed in dating conversations, the careful calibration of intelligence, smart enough to be interesting, not so smart as to be threatening. It appears in professional settings as the automatic smile, the apologetic tone when stating facts, the way competence is packaged in palatability. Schopenhauer would recognize in performative femininity a cruel paradox of the will. It promises power through the surrender of authentic selfhood, convincing women that their natural state is insufficient, while offering them a substitute self that is ultimately hollow. The philosopher, despite his own complex relationship with women, understood that any system requiring the denial of one's essential nature was a form of existential violence, a way the will tricks us into deeper suffering while promising relief. In myth, it was Narcissus drowning in his own reflection. In you, it's the habit you can't see, the performance that has forgotten. It's a performance. What mask have you worn so long that you've forgotten the face beneath it? In what mirror do you practice being someone else's version of desirable? And what would happen if you looked away? The secret whispered by broken glass. The most seductive woman is often the one who has forgotten who she was before she learned what men wanted. Every bid for love is paid with pieces of yourself you never get back. He scrolls through dating profiles at 2 a.m., thumb moving with the mechanical precision of a factory worker. Each swipe is a judgment rendered in milliseconds, too ordinary, too demanding, too complicated, too simple. He is shopping for a woman, the way his grandfather might have shopped for a car, with a checklist of features and a fantasy of how ownership will transform his life. This digital marketplace feels familiar, doesn't it? The reduction of human complexity to a handful of photos and curated insights. The strange mathematics of attraction reduced to algorithms and proximity settings. Each profile promises access to a life that might finally satisfy the endless hunger that keeps you scrolling at hours when healthy people sleep. But swipe deeper, past the final profile, and find yourself in an underground auction house where authentic selves are sold to the highest bidder. The auctioneer is a figure whose face cannot be clearly seen. It shifts constantly, reflecting the expectations of whoever looks upon him. The lots being sold are not bodies but essences, genuine laughter, unguarded vulnerability, the capacity for surprise, the ability to be truly present in a moment. The men in attendance don't realize they're not bidding with money, but with pieces of their own authenticity. Each bid requires them to surrender something genuine about themselves, their capacity for solitude, their comfort with imperfection, their ability to love someone who might not love them back exactly as they wish to be loved. The currency is always something they believed they didn't need, something that seemed unrelated to the prize they seek. He finds himself bidding on spontaneous joy. The lot is a woman's genuine laughter, captured somehow in a crystalline sphere that pulses with warm light. To bid, he must surrender his comfort with uncertainty. It seems like a fair trade. What use is uncertainty when you could own someone's joy? But as the bidding progresses, he watches other men around him become increasingly hollow, their faces growing blank and expectant as they trade away the very qualities that might have made them worthy of authentic love. The man who bid for unconditional acceptance by surrendering his capacity for growth now stares with dead eyes at his prize, unable to appreciate what he has won because he no longer possesses the depth to receive it. As Schopenhauer recognized, a man can be himself only so long as he is alone, and if he does not love solitude, he will not love freedom. The auction house represents the masculine fantasy of love as acquisition, the belief that the right woman can be obtained through the correct strategic choices rather than received as a gift between equals. When his lot comes up, he realizes with horror that spontaneous joy cannot be owned. It can only be shared between two people capable of surprising each other. But he has already traded away his capacity for surprise. The sphere in his hands grows cold and dark, the laughter inside fading to silence. The ancients called it treating Aphrodite like a merchant. Today, psychology names it objectification. The act of treating a person as a thing or object, reducing them to their physical attributes, sexual function, or utility to oneself. First systematically studied by Martha Nussbaum and others, objectification manifests in our modern world as the swipe-based dating culture that reduces potential partners to a series of consumer choices, the transactional view of relationships, where love is earned through the accumulation of the correct behaviors and attributes. The way men often approach women as problems to be solved rather than mysteries to be appreciated. It appears in conversations where men discuss getting women as if they were achievements to be unlocked, in the belief that the right combination of wealth, status, or technique can guarantee romantic success. Schopenhauer would see in objectification a fundamental misunderstanding of the will's nature. It cannot be satisfied through possession because it is the force that drives the possessor. The philosopher understood that treating another person as an object ultimately transforms the objectifier into an object as well. A hollow consumer driven by appetites that can never be truly fed. In myth, it was King Midas whose golden touch destroyed everything he tried to love. In you, it's the habit you can't see, the marketplace mentality that prices what cannot be bought. What are you trying to purchase with the currency of your authentic self? What essential parts of your humanity have you traded away for the promise of guaranteed love? And what would you become if you stopped trying to acquire what can only be received? The truth whispered in empty auction houses. The moment you try to own someone's love, you become incapable of recognizing it when it's freely given. Some wounds are designed to stay open because healing would end the story. She sits across from him at dinner, speaking about her troubled childhood, her battle with anxiety, the ex-boyfriend who broke her heart. Her vulnerability unfolds like origami, each revelation carefully crafted to appear spontaneous. She has learned that men are drawn to damage things they believe they can fix, that there is a particular kind of masculine ego that feeds on being needed more than being wanted. You recognize this performance, don't you? The strategic deployment of pain, the way trauma becomes a tool of seduction when wielded by someone who has learned that their wholeness is less appealing than their wounds. The restaurant becomes a theater where suffering is the currency of intimacy, and healing is always promised, but never quite achieved. But look closer at her tears and see how they refract the candlelight into something that doesn't quite resemble sorrow. Step through that distorted light and find yourself in the workshop of the architect of beautiful wounds, a figure who constructs elaborate emotional landscapes designed to trigger masculine protective instincts while ensuring that rescue remains forever just out of reach. The architect's studio is filled with half-finished sculptures of damage, depression that lifts just enough to keep hope alive, trauma that heals just slowly enough to require ongoing care, independence that crumbles at precisely the right moments to maintain dependence. Each creation is a masterpiece of calculated fragility designed to activate what the architect calls the savior complex, the masculine belief that love is proved through rescue. She didn't always work with the architect. Once, she presented her genuine self to the world, competent, largely healed, occasionally happy, capable of reciprocal love. But she learned through painful experience that men often found this version of her boring, too complete, too threatening to their need to be needed. The market, she discovered, preferred a woman who required saving to a woman who had already saved herself. The architect shows her his masterwork, a perfect recreational wound that provides endless opportunities for masculine heroism without ever fully healing. It's exquisite in its design, deep enough to inspire devotion, surface enough to avoid actual danger, consistent enough to provide structure to a relationship built on caretaking rather than partnership. But as she examines this beautiful wound, she realizes something the architect never intended her to see. The men drawn to her damage are themselves wounded in a complementary way. They need to be needed more than they need to love or be loved. They are seeking not a partner but a project, not intimacy but the illusion of importance. The relationship between the wounded woman and the saving man is ultimately a dance of mutual exploitation, each using the other's brokenness to avoid confronting their own. As Schopenhauer observed, all love is founded on an illusion, but he understood that some illusions are more destructive than others. The wound-based relationship creates a terrible equilibrium. She remains broken to keep him interested. He remains unable to actually heal her to keep himself necessary. She asked the architect, what would happen if she simply walked away, if she chose to be whole, regardless of how men responded to her wholeness? He smiles sadly and shows her the door, not the exit to his workshop, but a doorway that leads to a life where she might be lonely sometimes, but never again mistake her pain for her value. The ancients called it the wounded healer archetype. Today, psychology names it trauma bonding. The emotional attachment that develops between two people where one person repeatedly abuses, manipulates, or takes advantage of the other, creating an intense but unhealthy bond. First identified by researcher Patrick Carnes, trauma bonding manifests in our modern world as relationships where drama is mistaken for passion, where the cycle of crisis and rescue becomes addictive for both parties, where emotional instability is romanticized as depth and intensity. It appears in the cultural narrative that the most beautiful love stories involve saving someone from themselves, in the way mental health struggles are sometimes weaponized as tools of manipulation in relationships that feel more like ongoing emergencies than partnerships. Schopenhauer would recognize in trauma bonding the will's most sophisticated trap. It convinces us that our suffering serves a noble purpose, that our wounds make us worthy of love, when in fact they often prevent us from experiencing the kind of love that doesn't require our brokenness as its foundation. The philosopher understood that any relationship built on mutual need rather than mutual choice was ultimately a form of mutual imprisonment. In myth, it was Persephone choosing to eat the pomegranate seeds. In you, it's the habit you can't see, the beautiful wound you refuse to heal because you're afraid of who you'd be without it. What damage have you learned to perform for love? What wounds have you kept fresh because they bring you attention? And what would happen if you chose wholeness, even if it meant being chosen less often? The secret whispered by healed scars. Sometimes the most radical act of love is refusing to be saved. When illusions rot, love finally learns how to grow. An elderly couple sits on a park bench, not talking, watching strangers walk by with their dogs and their urgencies and their beautiful delusions about what love should be. They have been married for 43 years, and today they are going to speak the truth to each other for the first time. You might think you know this story, the comfortable silence of long partnership, the peace that comes after ashen burns down to embers. But lean closer to their weathered hands, loosely intertwined, and listen to what they're actually saying in the spaces between words. Step through their silence and find yourself in the garden of final truths, where all the elaborate architectures of romantic self-deception have finally crumbled into fertile soil. Here, beneath trees that grow not leaves, but discarded masks, not flowers, but abandoned personas, they tend to something unprecedented, a love that has survived the death of illusion. The garden is littered with the beautiful debris of their younger selves. Her strategic tears, crystallized and sharp as broken glass. His protective posturing, now weathered sculptures that small birds nest in. The elaborate dances they once performed to avoid saying what they actually meant, now pathways covered in soft moss that leads nowhere in particular. She speaks first. I spent 20 years trying to be the woman you fell in love with, and another 20 years hating you for falling in love with someone who didn't exist. Her voice carries no accusation, only the weight of recognition. He nods, understanding perfectly. I spent 40 years trying to save you from sadnesses I invented so I could avoid confronting the ways I was using your supposed fragility to feel powerful. I made you smaller so I could feel larger. They are not confessing sins, but recognizing the intricate machinery of mutual deception they built together piece by piece, year by year. The garden around them is not dying, but composting. All their beautiful lies decomposing into something that might finally be real. What would have happened, she asks, if I had been myself from the beginning? You would have terrified me, he admits, and I would have run. And what would have happened if you had seen me clearly? I would have had to see myself clearly too, and I wasn't ready for 40 years. As Schopenhauer knew, the greatest wisdom consists in knowing one's own ignorance, but he also understood that in love, our ignorance is usually mutual and mutually reinforcing. They sit in the ruins of their shared delusions, and for the first time in decades, they are curious about who the other person actually is. The garden begins to bloom with something unprecedented. Flowers that smell like honest laughter, trees that bear fruit tasting of actual intimacy rather than performed intimacy, grass soft enough to lie down on without worrying about who is watching or what image they're projecting. Are we too old to start over? She asks. We're too old for anything but starting over, he replies. They stand up from the bench, and it's not the end of their story, but the beginning of a different kind of story. One where love is not a prison constructed from mutual need and strategic vulnerability, but a spacious place where two complete people choose to share their completeness. The ancients called it the final initiation. Today, psychology names it mature love, the capacity for genuine intimacy that develops when two people are finally able to love each other as they actually are, rather than as projections of their own needs and fears. First described by psychologist Robert Sternberg as consummate love, mature love manifests in our modern world as relationships that survive the death of fantasy, partnerships where both people feel free to grow and change, love that includes but transcends physical attraction, romance, and even compatibility. It appears in couples who fight about real things rather than symbolic things, who can be boring together without feeling diminished, who choose each other fresh each day rather than simply honoring old contracts. Schopenhauer would recognize in mature love a rare victory over the will, not through the elimination of desire, but through the transformation of desire from possession to appreciation, from need to choice. The philosopher understood that most of what we call love is actually the will using other people to perpetuate our own illusions. But he also believed that genuine recognition between two conscious beings was possible, even if exceedingly rare. In myth, it was Odysseus finally recognizing Penelope not by her beauty, but by her mind. In you, it's the habit you can't see, the choice to love what is rather than what you wish was. What would remain of your relationships if all the strategic elements were removed? What would you love about yourself and others if love was no longer required to fix, complete, or validate anything? The final whisper from the garden where truth grows wild. Love is not a beautiful prison, but a door that only opens from the inside, and only when both people are already free.